It says we're streaming, but there we go. Good morning, everyone. My name is Fran Kelleher. I am Vice Chair of the Montgomery County Housing Commission, and I am here today to open the Budget, Finance, and Audit Committee meeting of September 27th, 2022. It's 11 o'clock in the morning or 5 after. We have joining us via electronic video hookup, our chair for this committee, Rick Nelson, who is also Commissioner Pro Tem of the Commission, and Jeffrey Merkowitz, Commissioner Merkowitz, and Commissioner Nelson will be chiming in from afar. We also have here in the room with us our Executive Director, Chelsea Andrews, as well as several key staff members who will be providing presentations and available for answering our questions today. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Rick Nelson, who chairs this committee, and begin the meeting.
Well, welcome to all those who are viewing the meeting. The first order of business is to approve the minutes of August 26th, 2022.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Then the minutes are hereby approved. The first item of business is fiscal year 22 fourth quarter budget to actual statements. And I'm assuming that this will be introduced first by our Executive Director, Chelsea Andrews.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, members of the public, and staff of HOC. Today's presentation related to our financial status at the end of fiscal year 2022 ends on a very positive note. I'm pleased to share, and staff will explain in further detail, that our agency ended the year with a surplus of $1,012,001, primarily as a result of lower than anticipated expenses in our general fund, which were offset by other considerations as well. A recommendation will come to the committee requesting that that surplus be divided into 50% allocations, and that those allocations go to both our general fund as well as our opportunity housing property reserve. I will pass it over to our acting Chief Financial Officer, Timothy Getzinger, who along with his staff will provide further details.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews. Again, for the record, my name is Tim Getzinger. I'm the acting CFO as well as the Chief Development Funds Officer. And the first item for today is the FY 22 fourth quarter budget actual statements, which our Budget Officer, Carrie Fowler, will be presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, Commissioners, staff, and members of the public. The agency ended the year with a net cash surplus of $1,012,001. This equates to 0.34% of our total operating budget of $300,440,652, or 0.52% of the total adjusted operating budget of $193,825,320, which excludes the housing assistance payments. The primary causes of the surplus were savings and various expense categories in the general fund, which were partially offset by slightly lower income in the fund, coupled with lower unrestricted cash flow in some of our unrestricted opportunity housing properties as a result of property performance. The general fund ended the year with a surplus of approximately $418,000, which resulted in a positive variance of $2.6 million when compared to the projected deficit of $2.2 million. The income we received additional FHA risk share income, which is shown as both an additional income and expense in the general fund. We also received additional development fees on projects that were due to pay fees in fiscal 21 that were delayed to 22, as well as FEMA reimbursements for COVID expenses and fees received from tax credit properties based on year-end cash flow distributions. The expense savings in the general fund was due to savings in administrative salaries and benefits due to turnover and vacancy, coupled with savings in most major categories within the fund. The bond funds experienced savings in administrative expenses for salary and benefits, legal costs, and financial services. And we are recommending that the surplus draw used to cover the expenses in the bond fund be used to reduce the draws for fiscal 23. Moving on to page 10 of your packet. Overall, Opportunity Housing, the portfolio experienced 6.6% higher vacancy loss than budgeted, covered with overages in administrative utility and maintenance. These expenses were offset by savings in bad debt. On page 18 of your packet, the chart is broken into two pieces: unrestricted and restricted development properties. Collectively, the Development Corporation properties experienced 14.9% lower vacancy loss, which was offset by higher concessions to increase occupancy of the properties and overages in administrative utility and maintenance, offset by the bad debt. For the Unrestricted Development Corporation properties, they generated $5.5 million in cash flow, which is approximately $588,000 lower than projected. For the Restricted Development Corporation properties, they ended the year with $56,000 lower cash flow than budgeted. Moving on to page 19 of your packet, collectively, the Opportunity Housing properties experienced 22.1% higher vacancy loss, offset by slightly higher rents. There was also, similar to the Development Corporation, overages in admin, utility, and maintenance, offset by savings in bad debt. The Unrestricted Opportunity Housing properties generated cash flow of $1.66 million, which is $1,066,000 less than projected. For the restricted properties, cash flow for this group was $467,000 less than budget. Moving on to page 20, the public fund. Public housing ended the year with $81,000 in expenses due to continued expenses at the Emery Grove property, which has been demolished, as well as subsidy received in prior years that was paid to Victory Haven. For the Housing Choice Voucher Program on the same page, the program overall had a surplus of approximately $2.2 million. For the housing assistance payments, the payments made to landlords exceeded revenue received in the year by approximately $400,000, and that will be covered by the net restricted position or reserves that are held for that purpose.
Could I interrupt with a question there? Sure. Can you give us a little background on why our payments to the landlords exceeded our budget? I think I know the answer because we made a change mid-year, but I'd like to hear your assessment.
Sure. We're in the process of the lease up of the program, and HUD benchmarks based on your utilization. So our current funding is based on our prior utilization. When they send us the housing assistance payments, if we spend less than we receive in a year, they hold that in a reserve. When you're in a period of lease up, our goal is to spend what we're getting and to increase our future funding. So we're drawing on the reserves that were received in prior years to increase our utilization, and then with the anticipation that HUD will rebench future funding at that higher level of utilization.
Okay, great. Very happy that it's because we're providing more leases that are signed and executed for the vouchers that we've got. Does any of it relate to the fact that we switched to the 110% versus 100% for our small area flexibility.
I would defer to Lynn Hayes if she's on the call for that question.
Okay, that's okay. We can ask her at a later date then. Okay, excellent. And second, this is totally outside of your arena. I don't expect you to know it at all, but while we were at NARO last week, one of the speakers from HUD literally said that they were distributing additional vouchers while she spoke to the various housing agencies to redistribute unused vouchers to agencies that had already spent their emergency vouchers. Chelsea, can you give us any update on what that might mean for us?
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. You're absolutely right. Last week, we learned that we received an additional 43 vouchers from HUD, and this was a result of unused vouchers from other housing authorities. So we're extremely appreciative of the additional vouchers and intend to quickly utilize them and provide support for our families.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Continuing on page 20 with the Housing Choice Voucher Program, there was an administrative surplus of $2.6 million in the program that will be restricted for future administrative costs of that program. The higher anticipated admin fee was partially offset by additional administrative expenses to support the lease up and additional vouchers such as the COVID-19 and emergency vouchers received. In addition, HUD increased the proration we were receiving for administrative fees twice within the year, which resulted in additional fees received later in the year. Moving on to page 15, as Chelsea mentioned, the staff recommendation is that the surplus be restricted 50% or $506,000 to the general fund operating reserve for future operational needs, and 50% to the Opportunity Housing Property Reserve to help replenish the reserve to fund shortfalls for capital needs at our properties that can be expected in this current and future seasons for properties that do not have sufficient RFR. On pages 15, continuing into page 16, you will see the display of our capital budgets for the portfolio. You will note that there are properties that did exceed their capital budgets due to unanticipated discipline needs of the properties. For properties where sufficient reserves are available, they will be used to cover the overages. Several properties were dependent upon the Opportunity Housing Property Reserve for fiscal 22. The total expenditures for the portfolio did not exceed the authorized amount allocated from this fund during fiscal 22. In addition, capital budgets from projects that have positive variances may be rolled forward as requested by the division for projects that were planned in fiscal 22 but were not able to be completed. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
What is the balance in the fund that the operating reserve?
At June 30, the balance was approximately $9.4 million, which is 6.34% of our adjusted operating budget.
And weren't we going to be looking at that and determining how much we really wanted to keep in that reserve account? And I guess that leads to the question as to why the decision to put 50% of our net income into that fund.
You are correct in that we have been trying to grow that reserve. We have not yet established a amount that it should be grown to. And we are in each budget cycle also budgeting to make contributions to both the general fund operating reserve and property reserve. The reason for the split is the overarching physical needs of our properties that exceed the available reserves for them. So that is the reason for the 50% recommendation split, but we are open to the commission's guidance on this.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that in view of the fiscal needs that we have, that some consideration could have been given or could be given to putting all of that net into the property reserves.
I think historically, the commission has taken the position to split it 50-50. We are the 1% general fund operating reserve, as you are aware, is pretty low, and yes, we're at 6%, 6.2%, 6.3%. Most companies of this size push to have a goal of 10%. Over a certain period of time, I would actually recommend that we figure out some sort of a roadmap and figure out how to get there in X number of years. I wouldn't, there's going to be needs for the properties. And so that's why I think the split 50-50 is prudent, but I do think that we need to continue to plan our resources accordingly and shoot for that 10% general fund operating reserve.
And in addition to that, Commissioner Nelson, the budgeted contributions that were included in the FY22 budget deposited more to the property reserve than was deposited to the general fund operating reserve. We do typically start with the 50-50, but we did contribute more to the property reserve during the budget cycle, which was also what contributed to a recommendation of a 50-50 split. And as Tim mentioned, that was the split we did last year, but again, we were open.
Okay. I'll accept the recommendation, for me at least, I'll accept the recommendation of Tim that we continue the 50-50 split.
Do we need an actual motion on that?
I don't think this requires a,
This is an action that we're asking the committee to support in terms of how to utilize the surplus. And so we would ask for the committee to provide a motion and affirm your support of that recommendation.
Then I will move that this committee recommend to the full commission that the surplus funds be split 50% to the operating reserve and 50% to the property reserve, in keeping with our recent history of doing so.
I'll second.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. So then I'm assuming that in the packet that goes to the commission, there will be a resolution to that effect,
Yes.
which is not included here. Okay, I think normally we don't have a motion on the financial statements, but that's why I was confused. But all right, that's fine. Let's go. The next item. The next item is the fourth quarter financial statement. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. This is also going to be presented by Tim Gettinger and finance staff, but I did want to highlight that the commission's net position has increased and has increased to $50.8 million or 22% as a result of various sales of properties. And also our current ratio of assets to liabilities have increased substantially from 1.98 in June of 2021 to 2.68 in June of 2022. I will turn it over to Timothy and his team to provide more details.
Thank you again, Executive Director Andrews, for this item. Francisco Vega, our Assistant Controller, will be presenting. Francisco, you're up.
And can I, good morning, everyone. we'd like to inform the committee that the unaudited financial statements that we are presenting today will be changing in the audited version, mainly due to the GASB and FASB adjustments related to the newly synced accounting and reporting standards, which will be incorporated in the audited financial statements. Thank you.
Thank you. Francisco?
Good morning, commissioners and staff. As mentioned, the commissioner's net position increased by 50.8 million or 22% from fiscal year and June 30th, 2021. And it's attributed primarily to the gain on sale of Shady Grove, Georgian Court, and the 3 Manor properties, partially offset by a net loss of 18.3 million. If we can scroll down to page 24. Great. The liquidity ratios improved due primarily to an increase in the OHRF current assets attributed to the proceeds from the sale of Shady Grove Apartments, Georgian Court Apartments, and the 3 Manor properties, partially offset by additional bond draws for HOC at Westside Shady Grove LLC, HOC at Stewarttown LLC, and Bower Park Apartments LP. In June 2021, the current ratio was 1.98 as compared with 2.68 in June of 2022. The quick ratio also increased from 1.85 in June of 2021 compared to 2.5 in June of 2022. The total assets, excluding the deferred outflows, increased by 148 million or 7.9% from 1.9 billion in FY21 to 2.0 billion in FY22. The increase in total assets was largely due to an increase in mortgage and construction loans receivable and unrestricted cash and cash equivalents, partially offset by a decrease in net capital assets. The net increase in total mortgage and construction loans receivable is primarily attributed to the multifamily bond fund mortgage receivables related to the multifamily housing development bonds. 2021 Series C and D bond issuance for HOC Willow Manor LLC, HOC at Georgian Court LLC, and HOC at Shady Grove LLC, and the Housing Production Fund Series 2021 limited obligation bonds. Seller notes from these real estate transactions, partially offset by single-family mortgage loan payoffs and prepayments and scheduled principal amortization under the single-family bond fund and multifamily bond fund. The increase in unrestricted cash and cash equivalents is mainly driven by the receipts of excess settlements proceeds from the Shady Grove and Georgian Court real estate transactions, and development fees and commitments fees from HOC at Willow Manor LLC, Alexander House LP, HOC at Shady Grove LLC, HOC at Georgian Court LLC, 900 Thayer LP, and HOC at Westside Shady Grove LLC, partially reduced by the repayment of Bradley Crossing County loans, additional draws for Hillendale Gateway, pre-development expenses from the OHRF, the acquisition of the Battery Lane Apartments, and the timing of the reimbursements of capital expenses from properties under construction. The decrease in net capital assets is mainly due to the sale of Shady Grove Apartments, Georgian Court Apartments, and the 3 Manor properties, and the FY22 normal depreciation of assets, partially offset by the acquisition of several multifamily properties at Avondale and Battery Lane. The total liabilities increased largely due to the issuance of MHBB Series C and D totaling 111.4 million for HOC at Willow Manor LLC, HOC at Shady Grove LLC, and HOC at Georgian Court LLC, and HPF Series 2021 limited obligation bonds for 50 million. If we could scroll down to page 26. Page 26. Thank you. The commissioner's net income totaled 50.8 million for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2022, compared to the net income of $21 million for the same period last year. However, after adjusting the net income for the recording of capital contributions from Bowell Park in FY22 and FY21, unrealized loss on investments from the single-family, multifamily bond funds, gain on sale of Shady Grove, Georgian Court, and 3 Manor properties for FY22, and Stewarttown and Holly Hall in FY21, and real estate equity transfers in FY21, resulted in an adjusted net loss of $3.2 million in FY22 as compared to an adjusted net loss of $5.1 million in FY21. The overall net decrease of $1.9 million in the adjusted net loss was largely driven by an increase in HAP income, an increase in investment income, an increase in management fees, an increase in dwelling rental, an increase in HAP administrative fees. This is all partially offset by an increase in HAP expense, an increase in fringe benefits, an increase in maintenance expense, an increase in interest expense, and administrative expense. If we can scroll down to page 28. A little further where you can see the adjusted operating revenue. Awesome. Thank you very much. Similarly, when revenues from operations for FY22 and FY21 are adjusted for HAP income and unrealized gain loss in investments, the adjusted operating revenues increased by $14.7 million from $156 million in FY21 to $170.1 million in FY22, largely due to the increase in investment income, management fees, and other income and dwelling rental income. If we can scroll down a little bit further to operating expenses. Awesome, thank you. When operating expenses FY22 and FY21 are adjusted for HAP expenses, the adjusted operating expenses increased by $17 million from $159 million in FY21 to $176 million in FY22. All expense categories contributed to the increase. If we can scroll down to the, awesome, thank you. The non-operating revenues net of non-operating expenses, when adjusted for the FY22 and FY21 gain on sale of assets, as discussed earlier, increased by $1.6 million from $3.1 million in FY22 to $4.7 million in FY22, contributed to higher non-operating investment income. That concludes the financial statement presentation. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much, commissioners.
Are there any questions? Then I'm assuming that we will forward this to the commission for their review. The next item on the agenda is the FY23 first quarter budget amendment. And again, I'll turn to Chelsea.
Thank you, commissioners. This is an action item for this committee. We are asking your support and recommendation of amending our fiscal year 23 first quarter budget based upon a number of factors. There is a surplus of $125,000 that would have been a projected draw from our general fund operating reserve that we would like to reduce the operating reserve draw to balance out. There is also a slight increase in our operating budget, a little over $4 million, $4.5 million that we would be asking an adjustment of, as well as an increase of expenditures related to our capital budget. I will defer to our finance team led by Timothy Getzinger and Terry Fowler, our budget officer, to provide more insight.
Thank you again. And this is our third item on the agenda, the FY23 first quarter budget amendment. And presenting this item will be Terry Fowler, our budget officer.
Thank you, Jim Chelsea. On page 44 of the packet, in the operating budget, for the general fund, we are requesting to roll over capital improvement budgets of $95,000 for the Eastwood Park facility and $90,000 for information technologies. The capital work will be funded from a draw from operation, and the funds were restricted at the end of fiscal 22 to roll forward to fiscal 23. In addition, the budget incorporates the newly acquired property Battery Lane, which was acquired on May 25th of 2022. In the general fund, Battery Lane will pay an asset management fee of $125,080 towards agency overhead. In opportunity housing, the Battery Lane budget will increase income and expenses by $4,328,860. And the cash flow for the property will be restricted during the first year of operations. On page 45 at the bottom, you will see the capital improvements budget that includes the rollovers of $95,000 and $90,000 respectively for facilities and information technologies, and a capital budget for Battery Lane of $56,000. As the executive director mentioned, the net effect of the FY23 first quarter budget amendment is a surplus of $125,080. The adopted budget included a of approximately $1.11 million from the general fund operating reserve to balance the budget. Staff recommends that the anticipated draw be decreased by the $125,080 surplus to an amount of approximately $988,000 in order to maintain a balanced budget. The FY23 operating budget for HOC increased by $311.9 million to $316.4 million, an increase of approximately $4.5 million. The capital budget for HOC increased from $247.2 million to $247.5 million, an increase of $241,000. Approval by the commission of any budget amendment will revise the FY23 budget to reflect an accurate plan for the use of the agency resources for the remainder of the fiscal year. And I'd be happy to address any questions you may have.
Does anyone have questions or further discussion on this?
No, I would just like to compliment the staff on how close they've been able to project, both in what we saw from last year and what we're seeing here. The numbers between budget and actual are coming in substantially the same. And so I just want to congratulate you on that work.
I don't have any questions on this presentation. I just have a question in general on the budget and, you know, the increased rate environment and wondering whether.
Can let's take a motion on this first, and then we'll go to your discussion, okay, sure. Jeff? So I will entertain a motion on forwarding this budget amendment to the commission.
I move that we forward staff's recommendation on the first quarter budget amendment to the full commission for consideration.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, and the motion has passed. Now, Jeffrey, you want to raise your question or the
sure?
item?
Yeah, no, just a question on, you know, the increased rate environment and whether we're anticipating needing to make budget adjustments, you know, for higher interest expense.
The rate environment will more likely affect our development budgets and the financing for those projects as opposed to the operating budget. Most of the debt in the operating budget is based on mortgages that are already established at a fixed rate. So
okay.
it dissipate changes, nor do we depend much on interest income in the operating budget because of the low rate environment that we have been in for so many years.
Right, and I would add that where we may find increase in interest expense would be on draws on the lines of credits that we have, as those are fluctuating with the LIBOR rate as it changes. I would also add, however, that some interest expenses would be offset by investment earnings as rates go up, or short-term investments. We'll see a little bit of a bump in terms of earnings. But I do agree with Terry that almost all the mortgages that we make for multifamily transactions are fixed rate, and if they are not fixed rate, they're supported by a swap transaction that fixes the rate, so there isn't any direct impact on our multifamily properties and the financings that exist.
Well, I think that that's a valid question, and I would hope that there would be some discussion about that tomorrow at the Development Finance Committee meeting, and maybe at the full commission, you could have a summary of that in fact the staff has looked at this and what the anticipated impact is or will not be because of the swaps and that kind of thing you just raised. I think it's something that all the commissioners would be interested in hearing because of the great interest that they have in the interest rate changes as they go on from day to day.
Okay. Cool.
Obviously, with the time frame and the notice, I want to indicate that we will give our best effort to have that information to the committee tomorrow. And if not, that's indulgence and an opportunity to prepare a thorough presentation for the committee next month if we're unable to provide that information by tomorrow.
Well, I wasn't looking for a big report for tomorrow. I was really just for the same kind of conversation we just had. I would hope maybe for a fuller report at the full commission meeting. So I don't want to see you guys burning the midnight oil tonight just to get ready for tomorrow's Development Finance Committee meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item is uncollectible tenant rents.
Yes, and commissioners, this is another action item where we would be seeking the support of the Budget, Finance and Audit Committee to join our recommendation to write off uncollectible tenant accounts receivable for the fourth quarter of fiscal year 2022. That amount is $127,482 and is consistent with prior write-offs. I am aware of the commission's desire to ensure that we are actively working to obtain resources and support to solicit these funds back from tenants who have left our properties, and want to assure the commission that we are in the process of moving forward in that direction. And we'll provide further details once we're able to demonstrate what that return will look like as we begin to engage in that process. But this is a recommendation to close out FY 2022 with writing off that outstanding balance. And would send it over, of course, to our acting CFO, Tim Gettinger, and his finance team to provide further details. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Andrews. Before I pass this to Nilu Rizigi, our accounting manager, I do want to note that in the presentation, we mentioned that we are currently working to procure a new collections vendor. We do have one. It is Assurant Recovery Solutions, and Assurant is in the process of setting up accounts. It was mentioned in the report that the statute of limitations on rent recovery is 3 years. So any delay in having this new vendor stood up will not impact us. We will still be able to do the same thing and send these past due accounts to the vendor. With that, I will introduce Nilu Rizigi, our accounting manager.
She's had audio issues.
Is there going to be further?
I think our county manager may be experiencing some audio issues. As we're trying to get her on, I'll go ahead with the presentation. So our current policy is to provide for an allowance for any tenant accounts receivable balance, which is ordered in 90 days. And essentially what we do is we report all of those write-offs of former tenant accounts receivable balance to an uncollectible account receivable database. And we also report this to the Equifax Credit Bureau. We do have a specific procedure that we use for putting these write-offs into the system. And so generally speaking, most of these write-offs fall into a few different buckets. The predominant one is actually tenants skipping, also tenants passing away, program ineligibility, such as that somebody recertifies at an income level that is too high for the program, as well as lease violations. And so after we receive notice that the tenant is no longer eligible or they vacate, resident accounting will then receive clearance from property management, and we post the deposit accounting EDR. If there is a balance owed, the resident accounting sends a letter to the resident with the amount. Property management signs and mails a letter to the resident. We do offer surety bonds, which provide for certain assurances that if something is owed, we can then collect on the amount of the surety bond, and we will submit a claim to be reimbursed. If there is additional funding available, the payments will be made and posted to the resident's ledger. If there's additional amounts owed, then we would send this to the collections manager, which is assurance, which would then take actions as appropriate. And moving on to page 50. The last write-off was $126,000. The write-off that we are proposing for the fourth quarter FY22 is a similar amount. It is $127,000. Moving to page 51, the first table shows the write-offs by fund or program. And as you can see, opportunity housing is the highest, we'll call it offender at $101,000.
Kim, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask Fran, will you take over for a moment, please?
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Tim.
Oh, not at all. And then the final of the RAD properties, and there are very few RAD properties that are still operating. As we take a look at what properties within the Opportunity Housing Fund, which is at the bottom of page 51, we provide you with a little bit more information of what properties are the key write-offs. Smith Home is $15,000, which is one of the higher ones, as well as VPC 1. The VPC 1 and 2 are generally speaking some of the higher write-offs that we see traditionally. So this is keeping somewhat consistent with what the trends we have seen. Next page.
Tim, is there anything you attribute those trends to?
So they're scattered sites. So it is actually somewhat easier for a tenant to vacate than to work without notice. So tenant skipping within a scattered site portfolio, that's going to be the highest level for that particular portfolio.
Are the per unit rents also generally higher in the scattered sites because they're larger? Or is that not a factor?
I don't know that it's necessarily a factor. I think
Okay.
it's pretty similar rank wise, but it is. You see more tenants. Skipping.
Okay,
Portfolios.
all right, thank you.
For the supportive housing portfolio, which is on page 52, we see that the King 10 program contributes to 23,000. And these amounts were due to 3 tenants who passed away, 2 tenants who voluntarily vacated their units, and 1 tenant who failed to complete an annual recertification, as well as one that went into nursing. The next one, again, Riot Properties. The write-off was due, and this is a single write-off, was due to one tenant who passed away, and 1 tenant who voluntarily vacated their unit. There were no write-offs in the 236 properties. And with that, that concludes the presentation. Again, we give staff's recommendation to garner support for the FY22 fourth quarter write-off of approximately $127,000, and we'll be happy to answer the questions.
Do you have any questions, Commissioner Markowitz?
I have a question that can wait until after we do the motion.
Okay. Then I would be willing to accept it.
So I move then that we accept the staff's recommendation and forward to the committee, the full commission, the amount listed for uncollectible rents.
I second. All those in favor? Aye. It passes unanimously.
And
Now,
yeah, no, it was actually, I suppose, more of a comment in the search for a new vendor. I'm sure this is a consideration, but just want to emphasize that any vendor that we select involved in debt collection should be, maintain very high standards of responsible collection practices.
Understood. Agreed. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
okay. Then we will proceed to the next agenda item, which is a discussion.
Patrice, before you do that, just add me as a affirmative vote to that last motion.
Oh, you're back. Then I turn it back over.
No, go ahead. You're doing fine.
Okay. All right, next item on the agenda is the extension of existing property management contracts.
Yes, thank you, Commissioners. We are presenting to this committee a recommendation to extend and or continue engagement with 19 of our property management companies so that we can move forward with the beginning of next year. As the commission is aware, we rely on our third-party property management companies to provide support for multiple properties throughout our portfolio. I do apologize for the late transmittal. However, you do see in that transmittal a reflection of the recommendations for the various sites as well as the entities in which we're recommending the continuation of those contracts. This is unique in the sense that we are requesting an extension for a year of those contracts, and once we are in a position and have had an opportunity to discuss further with the board related to the RFP core values for our property management solicitations, we anticipate in the beginning of next year proceeding with a full procurement process and in a tiered approach, soliciting for contractors to provide those services. At this time, I'm unable to see our full staff that are also involved on the hybrid screen here, but I defer over to our property management team to provide further details as it pertains to this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Andrews. And just to clarify, we are requesting extensions for 19 traditional property management contracts and also for 7 property management contracts that exist as development corporations. Mm-hmm. For the record, I would like to read the name of the 19 traditionally managed properties. They are Arcola Towers, Avondale Apartments, Barclay Apartments, Bauer Apartments, Camp Hill Square, Dale Drive, Fairfax Court, Manchester Manor Apartments, the Metropolitan, Pooks Hill Court, Residence on the Lane, Shady Grove Apartments, Southbridge, Spring Garden Apartments, Strathmore Court at White Flint, Tanglewood, The Willows, Timberlawn Crescent, and Waverly House Apartments. And if I believe I did not, for the record, state my name. My name is Nathan Bovell. I'm the Chief Maintenance Officer and the Acting Director of Property Management. On the call with us is Alex Thornton, the Asset Manager for HOC. The extensions that we're requesting for the development corporations are Barclay Apartments Development Corporation, Magruder's Discovery Development Corporation, Metropolitan Development Corporation, Montgomery Arms Development Corporation, Paddington Square Development Corporation, Pooks Hill Development Corporation, and Rad 6 Development Corporation. And just to further clarify, these extensions we're making that request for an extension for a year or until a completed property management solicitation has been awarded, the shorter of those two events. I'd be happy to entertain any questions. Thank you.
I've got two questions or comments. Number one, I was interested in looking at the description about the Barclay. What happened at their property review? They only got a 76. Is that correct?
That is correct. I don't have the particulars for their review with me. Mr. Thornton is on the phone, but he's not feeling well. I'm not sure if he's capable to respond. If not, we can definitely provide a response prior to the board meeting.
I mean, in going through those, it appears that most seem to be doing, at least in terms of REACT scores and occupancy, doing well. That's sort of an outlier. I was just wondering about that. You've also made the comment that it's either a year or a shorter period. And when I read through the memo, it just said a year. I didn't see the shorter period. So I guess the question is, if we anticipate it being for a shorter period, how are we going to convey that to the manager? And in view of the fact that we're talking about going through a whole revision of our property management RFP process, is it still advisable to think about a shorter period? Why don't we just do a year?
Excellent question, Commissioner Nelson. The reason that we're doing a year or until a solicitation has been completed and an award has been made is because part of this process, that what we're also attempting to do is to synchronize the expiration dates of these policies. Currently, these policies expire at random dates throughout the year at different intervals, and we're working to schedule them so that groups of property.
You just muted yourself, Nathan.
Oh, I'm sorry. We are working to schedule these properties and synchronize them in such a way that they expire at specific times throughout the year in September, December, and March. So we won't have those random dates. We will communicate effectively with the existing property management companies once these extensions are made so that they'll fully understand what that process is.
But the expiration will be the one that you've identified in the memo. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. The other comment I would make, and we ought to consider this for discussions next year when we renew projects. When you review the performance of our property managers, it would be interesting to us, I think, to know those that might have had to have some adjustment to their compensation because of less than anticipated revenues. That is not revealed as we go through those stats. So I don't know. I mean, like I say, the occupancy looks good, but what this information doesn't give us is to what extent we had to invoke that clause that would reduce the compensation based on not meeting the goals for income.
Noted, Commissioner Nelson, and we will include that in the further transmissions. And there will be several other property management contracts outside of this time period that may fall into this category. Right now, we're doing the ones that expire between now and March in anticipation that the solicitation and the core values for the contract will be done with the board. If that does not happen, we'll include that in the other extensions that may come later.
Okay. And Chelsea, I wasn't suggesting that you need to revise this packet for the commission. I'm just saying for future discussion.
Yes, and no, thank you. Great point. And of course, while we have that provision in our contracts, the other question is when and how we invoke those. And so we'll look at that closely and have that information for the commission as well.
Okay.
I would simply like to applaud the move towards a more sophisticated and standardized approach towards contracting for this service, as it is probably the key service that on a day-to-day basis affects more of our resident clients than anything else. So I appreciate the fact that staff is taking their time to make sure that the solicitation is done well so that the resulting contracts and services will improve. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
With that, do we need a motion?
Yes, please.
I think we do, yes. I so move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, then we unanimously send this forward to the full commission. And let's see, is that it? Do we
No,
have
there's another.
one item 6, extension of property management contracts development corporations. That was actually included in the presentation. So do we want a separate motion?
Yes, please.
Okay. Is there a motion to extend the existing property management contracts for our noted development corporations?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Then the motion passes unanimously and we'll forward this to the commission for their action.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you.
I think that concludes our agenda. Is there any further business that needs to be conducted today? If not, we will consider this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, commissioners.
Yeah.
All-
Have a good afternoon.
Too.
Take care.